If you compare beer with bratwurst,
and cheese with wine,
or even whiskey
with donuts,
then we think you can pair all of these delicious drinks with
murder,
conspiracies,
missing persons,
and more.
Drink with us as you feed your craving for true crime and creepy stories.
Hello, and welcome back to part 2. I don't even know what we're calling this yet, do you?
No, that's your job.
What's the town's name?
Villisca
Axe Murders part 2. Thank you for coming to listen again. And if you just hopped onto this one randomly, go listen to part 1. Otherwise, you might miss something that doesn't make sense. My name is Jason. This is Katie. This is Perfectly Paired With, where we pair a drink with an awesome story told by my beautiful wife, Katie. And she's going to give us a little tidbit about what we're going to be talking about this go around.
Shortly after midnight on June 10th, 1912, a family of 6, the Moores, plus 2 friends, a pair of sisters, were brutally murdered in the Moores' home with the blunt end of an axe while they slept. After failing twice to indict the first main suspect, William Blackie Mansfield, alleged to have been hired to murder Joe Moore and his family by Senator Frank Jones, the investigators turned their sights on a new suspect, a traveling minister. And when they asked him some questions, well, the story he had to tell was like something from a horror film.
Excellent. I'm super stoked about the second part. And to go with that, we're talking about what we talked about the last episode again. So I just figured, why don't we continue going with the same theme of drink as well? You said that this episode you believe is the better of the two.
I do. It's definitely a better episode.
Figured it'd be fitting to pair this episode with the better version of the whiskey that we drank for the first episode.
Oh, it's an upgrade.
It's an upgrade. So the first one was just a small batch, number 9. This one is number 9 reserve.
Okay. So but still from Iowa, still connected to Slipknot. Yes.
Yep. Same. Everything's the same. It's actually the same bourbon, but they put barrels aside to sit a little bit longer. I'm not sure how, they don't say on here, nor did I do research on that. I can't, I did see it in the beginning, but I can't remember. It doesn't matter. It's supposed to be better. We'll be the judges of that. And like I said, last episode, I really liked that number 9, small batch. So I'm expecting some good things out of this. What sitting longer should do. You said that, that
gives
palate.
You blood clots.
What?
That's what sitting for a long time does.
Oh, good one. Was not tracking.
You weren't
on that
asking.
One.
Oh, I see.
No.
You're explaining something about the whiskey.
Yeah, just like I said that, when you have a reserve, you reserve these barrels that will go out probably in a smaller quantity and it's more expensive.
Okay.
And it'll increase the flavor profiles.
Well, I found the other one quite intense, so I'm sure this one is just going to top it in ways that I'm not going to appreciate.
I'm not even going to give you anything on it.
Just pour it and pass it. I just want to know at this point.
I want to see your natural reaction.
Well, and we're definitely not done talking about the relevance of the railroad. It will appear again. So number 9, I'm just going to pretend it's engine number 9.
Such a fun coincidence to have in the first thing. I mean, I didn't even have to think about what I was going to do. Once you told me enough details, I told you, I'm sorry, we're doing a whiskey.
Yeah.
And then I told you the name and you went, oh, weird.
Yeah.
There's a song called Engine Number 9. This time we got the proper whiskey glass, the Glencairn out.
Well, and I just find it so fascinating that Slipknot comes from Iowa.
Oh, it is, right? Which,
They just seem so dichotic.
yeah, but I don't know. Maybe that's what farm country does. I feel like there's a lot of actors from Iowa too. I know there's a lot like around that area. That Midwest brings a lot of good talent.
Okay. So I find it better than yesterday. And I thought I wouldn't. Like the heat is there, the strong flavor is there. I just think it's a slight bit smoother. Yesterday's flavor I found incredibly jarring, like on my tongue. Like this
you said
is smooth and just coats it.
You put it in a way like when I was describing kind of what I was tasting,
Still
which
turns me into an owl.
Which, you know, the way I describe things, but by no means is I don't know, no way one of those people you'd watch on YouTube would go and ask, like, what do you think of this? What does it taste like? I'm not going to probably tell you, like, you know, well, you get a hint of hazelnut and, you know, that type of stuff. But still the green apple for sure is there. Man, it's kind of crazy. Like, I don't know. Maybe it's just because I met with some clients before we recorded and had a little bit of whiskey with them, and maybe my taste buds are off, but I feel like this tastes sweeter than the one yesterday.
I don't taste sweet. I taste the same, but smooth.
A little. That's good.
It's like engine number 9, excuse me, behind a filter.
Huh.
You just don't see the sharp edges.
Interesting.
That's how I would describe it. And I think anybody who enjoys whiskey would absolutely enjoy it.
I wonder, since you're doing like
not a whiskey
days
girl,
of whiskey,
Heath, so
what if your profile's just getting a little bit better?
My taste buds fell off yesterday. That's probably what it is.
Maybe, yeah. And maybe mine are a little bit jaded, but I do like it. I definitely taste a bit of the same. I'm getting and actually your smoothness, I can definitely see why you describe it. I'm getting way less heat, which is kind of surprising because the one yesterday was 45%. This one's 49.5.
Oh, dear Lord. We should start then.
So this boy, it should have some heat on it, but it's still there. It's not punching me like it was yesterday, but I like it a lot. I personally, I will sit down with both of them. I almost had us do that and compare both of them, but I will sit down with both of them and see, and with a fresh, clean palate, see what I think. But right now I'm leaning towards the small batch. I like.
Interesting.
It's crazy because $30 price difference.
Yikes.
All right.
Well, let's hop aboard.
Yeah.
This train ride
Choo-choo.
one more time. And a more expensive, I think better tasting whiskey made by a band called Slipknot from the state of Iowa is perfectly paired with the final chapter of our truly horrifying axe murder that took place in Iowa.
Excellent.
Reverend Lynn George Jacqueline Kelly was an English immigrant who, along with his wife, moved to America in 1904. Reverend Kelly lived in Macedonia, a town northwest of Villisca, and as an adolescent, Kelly had suffered a full mental breakdown, but as to why, I'm not sure. Reverend Kelly worked as a traveling minister. His father and grandfather had both been Methodist preachers, and he followed in their footsteps. Reverend Kelly would go preach in churches to fill the pulpit for a short period of time when necessary. He had preached in Methodist churches in North Dakota, Minnesota, Kansas, and Iowa, including several small communities north of Villisca, where his behavior was described as very odd. On the morning of Sunday, June 9th, Reverend Kelly had arrived in Villisca for the first time. Some sources did state that he actually arrived Saturday evening, but regardless, at 3 p.m. on Sunday, he preached at the Arlington Church in Villisca, and then he attended the Children's Day service, watching the program near the back of the church, close to where Joe Moore was also watching.
Is this the same day? of the murders.
Yeah.
The
Well,
day-
the murders were,
the day of,
yeah.
into the night.
Yeah,
The day
until the next
the
morning.
day before the night.
Yeah, they all died around midnight. So it's the day of or the day right before the early morning. At 5:19 the next morning, Reverend Kelly boarded the number 5 train and left Villisca, heading westward. But as the train chugged down the tracks, Kelly allegedly told his fellow passengers that there were 8 dead souls being left in Villisca, all of whom had been butchered in their beds while they slept.
He said that they had been butchered
in their bed. And this is prior to anybody even knowing that the family was deceased.
Was there a description of how he said it? Did he wake from a slumber and have a vision?
Well, that entire situation will come into question later.
Okay.
Then, 2 weeks later, Reverend Kelly returned to Villisca and posed as a detective so he could join a group of investigators in a tour of the Moore home. After this visit to Villisca, Kelly seemed obsessed with the crime, and he wrote numerous letters to both Ross Moore, who is Joe's brother, Joe's the father who was murdered, and the Burns Detective Agency, which is the agency that provided our Detective Wilkerson, who in our first episode came up with the theory that it was actually a senator in town.
So he writes them a letter.
He writes them just garbled, rambling letters about the crime.
No.
Yes.
About the crime. It wasn't even like
not
hey,
confession letters.
But it wasn't like I was there that day. I'm praying for your town. I'm praying for your talents to get this person.
Yep.
What?
Then in 1914, Reverend Kelly placed an ad, which is what you would expect a man of the cloth to do, in the Omaha World Herald, seeking a stenographer, but a very specific stenographer, one who is willing to type for him in the nude. Now,
I didn't expect that.
Now, in response to this ad, some authorities, some police officers operated their own little sting operation, writing the Reverend back, not obviously as police officers, but inquiring about his ad. And through this continued fake correspondence, Reverend Kelly would warrant a legal charge for sending obscene material through the mail. And what's curious about
this,
a
crime?
I don't think it is anymore. When he was arrested, the first thing he said was, "Don't take me back to Iowa."
What the?
Now, another grand jury in Villisca would return an indictment for Reverend Kelly for the murder of Lena Stillinger. And in May 1917, Reverend Kelly actually turned himself in.
Wait, okay. So where was this murder at? It was the indictment.
Yeah. So after they failed to bring charges against our Blackie Mansfield or Frank Jones.
Lena.
Yeah.
Forgive me for not
the 12-year-old. The 12-year-old who had her body exposed. A grand jury found enough evidence to charge Reverend Kelly for that specific murder.
Really? What? I'll go on. That's seems super weird that it was enough evidence for one of the murders, but not all.
Well, they didn't have him in custody. They simply needed to bring charges against him to bring him into custody, at which point I'm sure they were building a case to possibly charge him with the other ones. The grand jury simply found that they could only charge him for that specific crime, probably because there was a sexual component to Lena Stillinger, and the Reverend clearly had some sexual deviancies, wanting to hire a stenographer who would type in the nude.
Did you see or did you see anything that said what that evidence was, or was it just they found enough evidence? I guess you don't really get those.
Grand juries are closed.
Yeah.
You don't get the record.
That's right. I'm curious if his letter said anything.
Possibly.
If he specifically named her.
Maybe.
Yeah.
Now, the first question investigators wanted to answer was whether Reverend Kelly was left-handed or right-handed. Remember, they believed the axe wielder was left-handed.
Mm-hmm.
So, investigators decided to ask Reverend Kelly if he would be interested in some fresh air, maybe even a little exercise. And when Kelly said he would, investigators took the Reverend outside and handed him an axe in which to cut firewood. Because apparently that's how you worked out in 1917 in a small town in Iowa.
It's a damn good workout. It really is.
And as it would turn out, the Reverend was left-handed.
And that's a good way to do it because, I mean, obviously.
I just think it's a little obvious.
It's super obvious. But you get to watch his demeanor when he picks up the axe. But look, unless you're like super athlete or actually a lumberjack, they might. You aren't swinging an axe good from the wrong side. Like there's that is for sure a very dominant handed type of activity, and that's probably what like they could have just handed him a pencil.
Yeah,
so they write us a story,
and he did. That's not what they chose to do.
That's not what they chose to do.
Now, Reverend Kelly was held in a cell, and he was told that his cellmates were a couple of thieves. But in actuality, the thieves were a sheriff's deputy and a newspaper reporter, seemingly put there to document what the Reverend was willing to say about the crime when he thought no authorities were around. Like, these guys are just pulling out, like, all the stops. They're like, we will get this man. They put two people in his cell, one of whom was a newspaper reporter. Like,
why don't you hear about that happening anymore? That's crazy.
Now, eventually, Reverend Kelly did confess to the crime, and this is what he had to say. After the Children's Day service, Reverend Kelly returned to the home where he was to stay that night, which belonged to a Reverend Ewing. But Reverend Ewing was an asthmatic, and to mitigate the effects of his asthma, he and his family slept outside, leaving Kelly alone in the house. That night, Kelly said he kept hearing a windmill sound inside of his head, and he was feeling rather ill, so he decided to take a walk. Now, he was in the middle of developing a sermon, which he was going to call Slay Utterly. And as he walked, that's what his mind thought about. On the walk, he found himself in front of the Presbyterian church, and it was there that he heard a voice tell him, "Go on." And as he continued walking, he saw a long shadow showing him where to go. And this shadow fell upon the Moore family home. And as he approached the Moore house, he heard that voice again. This time the voice said, "Suffer the little children to come unto me," which comes from a very well-known Bible story.
Yeah.
And in response to that voice, Reverend Kelly's response was, "Yea, Lord, thy servant heareth." So Reverend Kelly picked up an axe, laying in the yard, believing that the Lord had provided him what he needed. He said then that he moved through the house as though he were in a trance. After killing the parents, Reverend Kelly said he heard the voice again, this time saying, "More work to be done." And then after killing the Moore children, he said the voice spoke to him again, saying, "Still more work to be done." And so the Reverend killed both girls sleeping in the downstairs bedroom. Reverend Kelly ended his confession by saying that that long shadow had taken him to utter destruction.
Okay. That's an interesting confession.
Mm-hmm.
If I were a cop, my mind would go from being elated that I got in a confession to, I don't know if I believe him. Like, I need more details from him to know that he actually did this.
Right. It's super common, and I think common knowledge that officers look for an individual to reveal specific information about a crime scene that maybe isn't known to everybody.
Yeah.
And so if he actually had committed the crime, which maybe he did, maybe he didn't, I feel like unless he is crazy, which I think he was very crazy, he would reveal actual details. I killed this person. And there's a lot of things about the crime scene that, at least in what I had access to, wasn't mentioned.
Yeah.
Like the bacon, like the covering of the mirrors and the windows and the bowl of blood, which lots of people were like, it had to have been some sort of weird ritual that was taking place.
Even covering the bodies.
Yeah.
Which a lot of this stuff people saw, they probably saw the mirrors covered. They probably saw the bodies covered. But they also could have assumed that the cops just covered the bodies.
Yeah.
And had no idea that the killer actually did that. Maybe the newspaper put it out there, but guarantee you that practice from law enforcement has been around for a long time.
Right.
To not let the public know all the details.
Except in this case, the whole house was basically overrun by people in Villisca.
Yeah, but they had to have had, gone back to headquarters, looked at all the evidence, and been like, what do we have that we can truly know none of those people there saw it? Yeah, you would think that would be something that would be stopped pretty quick, like letting people just in on crime scenes.
Well, it was definitely enough for them to charge him with the crimes, but not everyone in Villisca was certain of Reverend Kelly's guilt. A good portion of the town, including our detective Wilkerson, still believed Senator Jones was involved. In fact, the attorney who defended Wilkerson in his slander trial, W.E. Mitchell, was going to serve as Kelly's attorney at his murder trial.
Oh, man.
And once again, this attorney did not disappoint. Now, that doesn't mean his attorney didn't have his own opinion of Reverend Kelly. In fact, this is how Mitchell described his client. He was, quote, not only a nut, but a whole carload of nuts, end quote.
Well, that's a lot of nuts.
And what was crazy is the town of Villisca was literally divided almost along denomination lines. Like the people who went to the Methodist church believed it was one candidate. The people who went to the Presbyterian church believed it was another candidate. And they absolutely allowed that division to affect what businesses they were willing to go to, who they were willing to talk to, like while in public. It literally was like a very bizarre West Side Story situation.
Wow.
Just completely divided.
Did you ever say how many people lived in this town?
2,500.
It's pretty damn small.
Now, to summarize or to remind you, there were three main pieces of evidence suggesting Reverend Kelly was the killer. First was his confession, which he did recant, which means he took it back. Next was his alleged knowledge of the murders and his knowledge of how the victims were killed, which he shared on the train, prior to anybody even knowing that the Moores had been murdered. And lastly, there was that bloody shirt that he allegedly took to a dry cleaner in a nearby town a few days after the killings. Now, with regards to the confession, Reverend Kelly's attorney alleged that the confession was actually the result of a beating, and to prove it, he pointed to the prominent bruise which had appeared on the Reverend's face following the confession. And as it would turn out, the couple who claimed to hear Kelly speaking of the 8 dead souls could not be certain if it was the day of the crime or 2 weeks later after Kelly's second visit to Villisca.
And they just happened to be on the train both those days?
No, I don't. I think they were only on one day, but they could not remember when they had ridden
because
the train.
It's so far after that they were like, yeah, we were on a train around then.
7 years after?
Oh, yeah.
It's not like they could pull up their calendar or their e-ticket for the train ride.
True.
They could not recall.
That is kind of weird, though, because he went 2 weeks later. That's why they were like, it was one of those weeks.
Yep. Lastly, this attorney relentlessly questioned the witness claiming to have received a bloody shirt from Reverend Kelly shortly after the crime. He asked him questions like, how much blood was on the shirt? How do you know it was human blood? Had you received shirts with blood on them before or since? And considering it was an era of straight razor shaving, blood on shirts was not that uncommon. When combined with the fuzzy memories due to the length of time that had passed since the event, this evidence just seemed completely unconvincing.
Which is crazy because when you spell it out and chronologically, it's very convincing. This dude had something to do with it because, like, how do you match so many things to one crime? But there is the human element to it. And when somebody wants somebody to be guilty, you can get minds to remember things wrong. And maybe not intentionally, but it could be because, you just kind of want to be a part of it.
Well,
Star witness.
At the end of the trial, the jury was deadlocked, 11-1 for an acquittal. But that doesn't mean he's acquitted, right? It's a mistrial. So there was a second trial. This one ended in an acquittal, which means he was found not guilty. So to this day, the brutal Villisca Axe murders remain unsolved.
Wow. So amongst two trials, 22 people found him guilty, but 2 people didn't.
No.
Is it 11?
It's
11, or is it 11?
They all
12,
but one
right? Yeah.
wanted an acquittal. No, all but one wanted an acquittal.
Oh,
there was only one
really?
person on the first jury
I heard
who
that
wanted
wrong.
to find him guilty.
Wow.
Right.
Oh, okay. So, which would lead me to think, I did think his confession was super, super sus, as they say, amongst the kids, I think, anyway. I think it was just it sounded too much like somebody that wants to be guilty of it. Like, they're infatuated with it. There's something wrong with their brain.
Right.
And it almost, his confession almost sounded like he convinced himself that he was guilty of it. Like, it sounded like a story that he created and probably truly believed, because it was enough that, they obviously charged him with it. I also was curious when you gave us the different things that, pointed to him, what is going to happen to make this guy not get charged, because you said that there was 3.
Yes, we are not
people.
Quite done yet.
And his confession is what I was like, no, there's no way this is going through on the trial. Like, it's not convincing enough. And then you said that there was 7 years later. That's a lot of time.
Yes.
Especially back then, where you're not like,
life is just hard, and the years seem to last forever.
Well, and also you don't have, like, today we have just, news reminding us of everything. And when an anniversary comes around of, like, such a brutal killing, the towns would be, reminded of all the details and everything. And so would anybody that was there. And maybe that helps with memory these days. But even these days, 7 years is so long for you to look back and be like, what was I doing and seeing at this point in time?
Right. Well, at the beginning of the first episode, I said that there is also the chance that the Villisca Axe murders could have been committed at the hands of one of America's first serial killers. So a team of modern investigators used notes about the crime scene to technologically recreate the crime. Here is what they believe happened. They believe that the murderer actually hid in the barn, watched the family, and then waited for an opportunity to attack. In one of the grand juries, evidence was presented that there was an impression in the hay near a hole in one of the barn walls, which would have given the perpetrator a direct view of the back of the home. They believe that the attack began with Joe and his wife.
Say that again. There was
an impression in like a hay bale where they postulate the perpetrator sat and watched the family.
Okay.
Now, this team believed that the attack began with Joe, the father, and his wife. Then the perpetrator moved on to the Moore children. But what this team noticed was that the blood actually streamed off of Joe's pillow and onto the floor where it pooled in one of Joe's disregarded shoes, indicating that Joe wasn't dead after the initial attack. And the stream of blood was due to his heart still pumping. So before our perpetrator headed downstairs, this group speculates that the perpetrator most likely returned to the adults. And this time, he's going to bludgeon them again to ensure that they're dead. But with the wife, he isn't going to use the blunt end of the axe. He's actually going to mutilate her entire face using the sharp side.
Jeez. Which kind of adds an element of connection between him and the wife. Or she just wouldn't freaking die. So,
or just anger. Or
because he did have to come back to them and bludgeon them again.
It's clear that he seems to have issues with seeing faces, right? He doesn't want to see his own face. He covers all their faces when they're gone. Perhaps the second attack, he just found like even more aggressive form of rage at this woman's face, and he decided to use the opposite side. I don't know. Continue on with their theory.
So what if he didn't know until the end, that last person, that he hadn't been hitting them with the sharps?
Well, what was interesting is the axe was actually very dull anyway. It was used to like break up coal. So maybe it was difficult to tell which side, or maybe he even like attempted a few hits and realized it wasn't very effective. And so he switched. I don't know. This is just me speculating.
I've seen a blunt axe that's been, it's just never been sharpened. And coal, it's harder, but it's not, I don't know. Wood is freaking hard too, but it is soft. It is. Like it is, there's definitely way more porous. Coal is not like, it's not like you're striking rocks. It's still soft. It's still going to break. So while I can see it being a lot more dull, I think 100%, like a man's force swinging that down, anybody's force really, just from where it comes from, up in the air and down, and the weight of it should do the job still.
Well, during the second attack of the parents, the shoe filled with blood is actually tipped over and then it spills onto the floor. Now, this team believes that the attacker killed the younger Stillinger sister first, which is Ina. And in the attack on Ina, her older sister, Lena, actually woke up and she tried to fight off her attacker. She did have some defensive wounds on her arm. So you asked if anybody awoke. And according to this team, there was probably only one person who did, and that was Lena Stillinger.
So she's one of the young girls. How old is she?
She's 12 years old. She isn't a children of Joe and his wife.
She's not a children of them?
No, she's not a child. She's not a Moore child. She just happened to be staying over at their house. It was happenstance.
Yeah, because they live far away or something.
Their parents, wealthy farmers, weren't at the Children's Day service. And they didn't want to walk on the dark streets to get to their grandma's house.
Smart. Safe. Being safe. Unless you're stuck at the Moore's house.
But do you know what's crazy? Is a lot of my sources actually referenced these theories that Lena was the target the entire time. So like in my mind, as like a Stillinger parent, you go through this like, oh, was it they went to a house that happened to be a house where a man was going to kill everybody in it? Or wasn't my child who brought this upon the household. And people thought so because what happened with her in the end was completely different to like what every other victim endured, right? He posed her body. He removed her undergarments.
The only one that
any of that happened to was this 12-year-old girl. And lots of people speculated that maybe she was the target the entire time and the other individuals had to die so that our perpetrator could take his time and do what he wanted to do with this 12-year-old girl.
Oh, yeah. Interesting. And then my thought automatically went to, what if it was dominoes, where one domino gets knocked over and it hits another and hits another. And the dominoes with these people is he has his one target. He accidentally wakes up one other person, so he has to take care of them. Wakes up another, has to take care of them, wakes up another. But
with the most problematic victim, which was Joe, who was 200 pounds. He was a formidable individual.
I think you said something why they did, but did you say why they thought, what their thinking was, where he started it all? I mean, we're talking about
the weapon ended up
120-year-old.
The weapon ended up in the Stillinger downstairs bedroom. There's no way the killer would have killed the two girls, moved upstairs, killed everybody upstairs, brought the weapon down, and stuck it in the bedroom. That's their theory. And
didn't you say that the theory is that he actually went back upstairs again?
No, that would have been upstairs. Attacked the grown-ups, went to the kids' bedroom, killed the kids, heard some sounds, went back to the parents' room.
He's already upstairs.
And then navigated downstairs.
Okay. Oh,
strange. Anyway, food for thought.
Strange. That is crazy, though, that also that girl was the only one that fought back as well, that they could tell.
Which maybe makes me think that there was some interaction prior to our perpetrator killing her. Like he caressed her face. He did something else to her, and then she woke up. And then so she was aware when the attack actually took place. I don't know. That's just what my mind thinks of.
Yeah.
Now, once dead, the killer removed Elena's underwear, used it to wipe blood from the axe, which is just gross, and then hid the undergarments underneath the bed. He then caused the blood smear on her leg as he repositioned the body. Then he had his way with the bacon slab.
Oh, gosh.
Now, our axe murderer then took the home's skeleton key and locked the door before walking out of town under the cover of almost complete darkness. Our perpetrator then waded into the river to clean himself of blood evidence before hopping on a slow-moving freight train straight out of Villisca.
So there's a train nearby there? By the river? The train track?
Well, Villisca is a railway town.
Just trains everywhere in the story.
Yep.
But just the dogs lost the scent. Did the cops
At the river, he washed himself of all the scent, got out on the other side of the river, found himself a freight train.
I'm curious if the cops went to the other side of the river. See if the scent continued.
How did the cops get to the other side of the river? It's like a bad 1912 joke.
They thought about the next way to get to the other side, and they're like, that's a lot of work.
Well, I got my good shoes on today, Captain, so I'm not crossing this river. Looks
like the dogs lost the scent. Weird. At a river.
Let's get a fingerprint expert. He'll solve it for us. Let's go home, chaps.
But yet the dogs are like barking at the other side, wanting to cross. Unless it's a giant river that like ferries could go through.
Or freight trains. Now, this group of people believed that our perpetrator would have been in his mid to late 30s, and considering the exertion required to kill 8 people with an axe, he had to have been a very powerful man, most likely with a borderline personality, which would be the best dating profile ever. Mid to late 30s, super powerful, possibly borderline personality, can swing an axe for roughly 30 minutes straight.
Seriously, I mean, you just laying out, I'm incredibly strong. I mean, do you really need to say borderline if you're super powerful?
Borderline personality is like a thing.
Yeah,
where you walk the line between being normal and absolutely
it's
cray-cray.
It's a nice way to say like somewhat psychopath. And
Yeah.
honestly,
Yes.
nobody makes it in politics or high up in giant companies and makes, millions of dollars every year without a little bit of psychopath to them.
You either become the CEO of a company or you bludgeon 8 people in their beds.
No. Or you go after, some high, crazy, powerful political position. And then you make millions of dollars through the stock.
Correct.
You got the inside.
Dang. Way to make this story even more depressing.
Well, we have a politician here that looks like he possibly could have done it. And from everything you've told me, kind of sounds like he did.
Well, wait a second. We still have our third potential suspect who could have been one of America's first serial killers. So on April 26th, 1911, a 38-year-old man named Henry Lee Moore was paroled after serving time for forgery. He would find work working for the railroad. On September 17th, 1911, the Burnham family of 3 and the Wayne family of 3, next-door neighbors living in Colorado Springs, were murdered with an axe. There were no signs of robbery, and the axe was left behind, just like in the Villisca slayings.
Oh, crazy. And it's tied to Colorado.
Yes.
Cool.
Then on October 1st, 1911, in Illinois, the Dawson family of 3 was bludgeoned to death using a weapon of opportunity. So it wasn't an axe, but with the Villisca killings, the axe just happened to be a weapon of opportunity. Bloodhounds were used in this case, and they followed the scent of the killer to a pond and then to a railroad yard.
Because they went to the other side of the pond to see if the scent continued.
Yes. Then, 14 days later, William and Pauline Showman, along with their 3 children, were bludgeoned in Kansas. A cloak was discovered thrown over the family's telephone, and a lamp, which had its chimney removed, was found at the foot of one of the beds, which was a piece of evidence found in Villisca.
Yeah. Which I still don't know what that is, but, just kind of try to imagine what it was. I won't ask you to explain it. Go Google that. A chimney to a lamp.
Yeah.
Because when I think of chimney, I think of a freaking fireplace.
No. Just wait. Oh.
But the cloak over the phone.
I think they're connecting it to the Villisca killer covering things with clothing and cloth.
All
right. Pauline's body had been sexually posed after her death, and once again, bloodhounds tracked the scent of the killer to the railroad tracks.
Dang. Okay.
Then in June the following year, you had the Villisca Axe Murders. On December 4th, 1912, Henry Lee Moore wrote a letter to his mother saying he had plans to visit her, and when he did, he would bring her something nice. So Moore traveled to Columbia, Missouri, and checked himself into a hotel on December 17th under the alias L. Smith. Now, according to Moore...
Why did Moore need an alias?
I'm going to tell you why. According to Moore, when he arrived at his mother's house, he discovered his mother and grandmother bludgeoned to death with an axe.
No.
But once investigators discovered evidence in his hotel room, Moore himself would be convicted of the murders. And as it would turn out, police discovered newspaper clippings of other famous murders in his possession. And then Moore would admit to viewing mutilated bodies while visiting morgues. Because he sounds like a riot.
Wait, the family's name is Moore, right?
Yeah, no
relation. Isn't the same? Oh my gosh.
No relation.
You gotta, with me, you have to say, this is not one of the people that were killed or related to them. Yeah, I was thinking.
No. No relation.
I was thinking, but
just a guy riding around on trains, killing people with
gotcha. I think you all get the
bludgeoning
point. I was
tools.
confused as if there. And maybe somebody else was, so I'm glad I asked.
So while it's been speculated that Henry Lee Moore could be responsible for this string of slayings, including the Villisca Axe murders, it has never been proven in a court of law. So who do you put your money on? The senator, the reverend, or Moore?
Okay, so Moore, there's killings before.
He's released. He works for the railroad company. And there's this string
They
of
found him
acts,
guilty of
his mom and
the
his
mom.
grandma.
And he was released?
No, so that was the end.
Oh, that was the end. That was what got him finally.
Yep. And so
And
he was
they-
convicted. And then all of a sudden, these suspicious
They
axe
do,
bludgeonings stopped.
I guess, the professionals tie all of these other murders to him.
They don't
Or they
officially tie. They speculate.
is it in the way that some of these famous serial killers, we know definitely they did that murder, but they couldn't prove him guilty
I don't
for
think
it?
we definitely know anything. It's just one possible theory.
I like these old timey ones because it's just such
Because nobody knows anything.
it's just such a mystery, and we can ponder and ponder. And but then I find myself pondering. I'm like, there's freaking universities out there with students studying criminal law and criminal science. Is that what you call the CSI?
Criminology.
CSI. Well, obviously, dive into it's basically the job. It's how much time they put into it that we won't figure out. But it is kind of fun to, figure it out in your own mind. But at the same time, it's incredibly frustrating because, geez, things were primitive. Like, criminology has come a long way. It is impressive. It's also kind of, I don't know. If you look at the way technology has run, with now here we are with AI and whatnot, shouldn't criminology be a little better?
Do you know what I think is kind of funny? So, like, ancient justice practices were literally an eye for an eye, right? That's Mesopotamian law, like original civilizations. No wonder they did it. They didn't have the ability to actually solve crime. So it's like, we think you did this. We're going to give you this consequence because we think it's fair. And then we're all just going to move on because we have to focus on surviving life. And so
Interesting.
Crimes that occurred in the 18th, early 19th, 20th centuries
With
is this medium, this middle of the row. We still don't really have the ability to solve these crimes with a ton of certainty, but we really would like to because we're enlightened now.
It's
we
their
want
laws.
to make sure there's fairness.
It's their laws moving ahead of their time.
Yeah, it's just a very interesting
we're a little
time.
backward. We're technology is ahead of our laws right now.
Even
you go through the one thing does better than the other, and really at this time you are looking at practices that we still have today because they are good practices. They for the most part can truly find exactly who a killer is if you do it right.
So here's what I find super interesting.
With all the tools
they
we have.
bring in a fingerprint specialist. I guarantee you, homeboy axe killer was not wearing gloves.
Yeah.
And yet the specialist said there are no fingerprints, none on the axe, none on the plate of food, none on the bowl of bloody water, none on the chimney to the lamp. There's none. So it was on this the cutting edge of this technology where it was not useful. But I think the pendulum is going to swing the other way because now we're so scientific that people are I found DNA. But touch DNA could have been left
it's too far ahead.
It's too far ahead.
And
so we have to come back around and say, okay, this technology, this type of evidence is good, but we also have to use a reasonable mind. Whereas this story is let's embrace this technology, but they didn't actually have the ability to use any of it.
Boy, it's just not fair. It's no matter what, we're here in the future, but we're still humans with our monkey brains and want to freaking be like, no, I know who did it. The technology is going to prove
Oh,
it.
somebody's going to comment on our show. Humans with monkey brains.
That's a phrase. That's a pretty common phrase, I think. I don't.
So you don't have a favorite suspect?
I kind of don't, and I'm really disappointed in it. Like, usually, I've got enough that I could come up with something, but I don't know. I just feel like the times back then just didn't provide good enough knowledgeable people to use the tools that they had. And I'm impressed by that time quite a bit. Like, through this story, learns that they have a lot of stuff then that we still use today, which is crazy. And I mean, I don't know what the fingerprint specialist did. What did he use? Charcoal, to try and get a print?
That would be fascinating to research.
I was going to research it while we were doing this, but it's just too much pausing, and we'd go down a bad rabbit hole on that, I'm sure. But it's impressive that they had a lot of the techniques that they use today, and still, while each one, honestly, the last guy, Moore, is my least, just because it's so speculative.
See, and I don't think it
he
has
actually
to be
makes the
more
most sense
necessarily, but I do think it was somebody who just traveled the trains.
Yeah.
And
yep. And that's why I think Moore makes the most sense,
is
he used the train system.
People.
And it's honestly like, well, whoever did this either used the train system or they were in the town already and made it look like somebody used the train system. And maybe they did themselves, just like hop out of town for a second, come back. But that's where, like, they were using good police techniques that, like I said, we still use today. And but everything else wasn't caught up. Like, you couldn't check like the record for who was on the train. And
well, fun fact, because of the Villisca Axe Murders, Iowa actually created its like official state police force.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
That wasn't a thing then?
No, it wasn't. Like, all these, like, the Miranda warnings wasn't a thing. Like,
True.
all these different protocols for how crimes like this were handled were not things in 1912.
And actually, everything we have today,
they were maybe 40 years removed from the Wild West, where it was just like, that's what you have to remember. Such a strange period of time between westward expansion and almost modern America, where life was just kind of unsettled.
Yeah, which makes me like, they really were living in a time kind of like ours, where Industrial Revolution was starting around then, right?
Oh,
or am I way off that? No, that's like
long since happened.
Oh, okay. So you had we can leave that in for sure, because I really didn't know.
History lesson. The Industrial Revolution was prior to 1912 when this occurred. The Industrial Revolution created like the capacity for the steam engine, which is why railroad travel became super common. We're talking.
When I think of the Industrial Revolution, I think of which I know you're 100% correct. That started long, but it went a while, and maybe they called it something else. When did the steel guy? He's not Rockfeld. It's
Rockefeller.
Is it Rockefeller? It's one of the rich men nowadays. Anyway, just the steel company that he had providing steel for everything, because the Industrial Revolution made it so everybody needed steel. I think that's around this time. That's why I think it's that. I could be wrong. Anyway, I'm rambling. I think they were going through a very
what a wild time to be alive. That's
what a wild time. I think we're
if
going
I could
through.
be a homemaker in 1981, which I feel like would just be a lovely time to be a mom. I'd like to be alive in 1912. Like a world unsettled, a life uncharted.
Certainly. But
anything goes.
I think we're in a time similar to that. It's not quite Wild Wild West to modernization. That actually, maybe that is crazier than I don't know, record players to CD players to MP3 to everything's on your phone within 20 years. And now everything we have right now with the internet and AI, it is a similar, like what you mentioned, we went from Wild Wild West, everybody on horses, sheriffs, shootouts, like true Wild Wild West, to a time that is similar to ours now, but very removed. And now we're kind of, on that. It just had to have been a crazy time.
Yeah.
You're looking at me like, just like,
crazy time.
Where are you going with this? Maybe I Michael Scotted that a little bit. But
now, if you ask a local to the area, the name Villisca is a Native American word that means pretty place or pleasant view. But what's more likely is that the name Villisca comes from the word Waliska, which belongs to the language spoken by the Sac and Fox Nation. And it means something very, very different. And when you consider what happened to the Moore family and the Stillinger sisters that awful June night, I can't think of a more fitting name for the town than one based on the word Waliska, which means evil spirit.